Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. And we're going to continue where we left off yesterday. I was not able to move on. There was just too many things or threads that we would have had to follow. So we're going to pick up from there. Before we begin, can you join me in a word of prayer? Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful, Lord, for the things that you show us from your word and the effect that they have upon our Christian walk, upon our life. And we're thankful for your Spirit speaking to our hearts and the conviction and power that it brings. We pray for this study, Lord, that as we open your word together, that your Holy Spirit can be our teacher. And we ask, Lord, that the things that we study, that they can be useful in reaching others with the gospel. Be with us now, we pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I don't know how many people spent a bit of time trying to understand the history of the 1260. So a lot of information. I read a little bit about Charlemagne and Pius VI, kind of looking towards the end of the 1260. I didn't have time to look into the Crusades at all, but I can give you just sort of a general overview of what happens in this period. And this is very, very general. I'm just going to go to this diagram we have here. So we all know the Pope. He becomes, the time of papal supremacy begins in the 6th century, as Ellen White says in The Great Controversy, chapter 3, where she deals with 2 Thessalonians. And we know 2 Thessalonians is addressing the taking away of the daily and the setting up of the abomination that maketh desolate, that 30-year period in there. And we know that we have Justinian's, decree and all those different things that happen. There's a Sunday law in 538, and I might have it in my notes. I can't remember it now specifically what it was. Should be able to remember these things, but I don't always. And then we started looking at, well, what about Charlemagne? He becomes at the beginning of the 9th century. We now have an empire, an emperor in Western Rome. Now we have, of course, in Eastern Rome, in Constantinople. And they become in conflict to some degree. And I'm not sure all the different conflicts that occur, but it does create a conflict. Now, I don't know what people know about the Crusades. I know a little bit, but not very much. I know they go on for quite a while. And there's, basically the idea is that Islam has taken over Jerusalem, and the Catholics want Jerusalem to be controlled by Christians. And so there's going to be these crusades that occur. And they do precede 1299. So the rise of Othman, right? So the Ottoman Empire, which begins July 27th in 1299, obviously the beginning of the first woe, 150 years. And then we have the second woe, and that's going to be Constantine. Constantine the 11th. So what I was thinking, and I want some input in this, do we look at Eastern Rome, even though that this mostly addresses the Western, like the Roman Catholic Church? Because we always just think about, well, Pope Pius, he's the Pope, right? It's the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, not the other Christian churches that are similar. Do we address the East? Do we address Islam? there's so many different waymarks. If we start to look at all of these different uh, lines, I don't know. Any thoughts on this? Did anybody do any thinking about this before we proceed further? Anybody think about this since yesterday morning?
I've spent a little bit of time, but I'm looking at so much of what we've got here regarding this with Clovis in 508 and then the 30 years to 538,
Yeah.
and how this is kind of a beginning. I mean, I recognize that there have been studies that are showing that 30-year period as being a preparatory time, much as when Christ was being prepared for his ministry.
Right.
So,
so if we take the line from the time of Christ,
right,
the time of the end is going to be the birth of John the Baptist, right?
okay,
Right. And then you're going to have the birth of Christ, and then you're going to have his baptism, and his crucifixion, right? There's different ways people have looked at that line. But normally we put the cross as the arrival of the second angel's message.
right.
So, and that's why here, in trying to say, well, how do we take this 30 years? How do we mark these waymarks? However it's done, I think once we're done, we'll see that things fall into place rather nicely. But part of the problem is we're not particularly certain about the period of darkness, what exactly it is. I mean, we know it probably has something to do with the end of paganism, pagan Rome, and then we have the rise of papal Rome. And the question is, how do we mark that? And then we're going to have trouble again with the second angel, because there's lots of different things that we can address. What we've tried to address so far, at least with marking the events, is we're taking the events mentioned in Daniel chapter 11, but some of them are fairly vague. So if we go back there again, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit, but I don't have an answer to it yet. So obviously we have the dramatic invasions in verse 30, right? So that's the ships of Kittim. And, we mark 410 for the start of that, because that's going to be when he returns, right? He shall be grieved in return. And then he's going to have indignation against the daily, or against the Holy Covenant, right? And that's going to be ending the daily and setting up the abomination of desolation. That's what's going to be happening in the next verse. And then we had, so shall he do. He, pagan Rome, shall return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. So that's, what happens in that period, in that 30-year period. We're going to, or even before that, we start to see this mixing of Christianity and paganism, right? So that's well described in Great Controversy, chapter 3. And then the arms, military might of Clovis of the French, when he's baptized on December 25th, 508, we're using that as a waymark, shall stand on his part, that is on behalf of papal Rome. They shall pollute the sanctuary strength, that's paganism, and take away the daily, right? So remove paganism. So the sanctuary of paganism is moved out of the way. It's been hindering papalism. And then they're going to place the abomination that make it desolate. Right. So this has to do with the power over church and state and conscience. So we mark 538. And then we had, so those are all clear. But I mean, as far as waymarks, as far as events, we've marked them. How we label them, that's still another story. And then such as do wickedly against the covenant. So we had some discussion as to what that might be. He shall corrupt by flattery. So there's going to be people who do wickedly against the covenant, and the papacy is going to corrupt these people by flatteries. But the people that know their God shall be strong and do. So I had a question, could we take this, such as do wickedly against the covenant, have to do with Islam's attack upon Christianity? Or is this just the papacy's attack against true Christians? So we need to decide that.
I think I would fall more on the papacy
Okay.
and their attack than I would with Islam.
Okay, so we're going to say that this is, so those and such as do wickedly against the covenant, we're going to say that that is, now Swearingen had, those who turn against the gospel, some other stuff, but I have those who turn against the gospel through recantation. Those who reject the gospel are the ones that do wickedly against the covenant. So these would be apostates. And then the papacy is going to corrupt by flatteries these apostates. So that does make sense. I think we can leave that. Now, we have to figure out what these flatteries are. Now, and I think that's why I was looking at Charlemagne, because, what we end up having in this period, if we think about this period of papal persecution, well, persecution grows and develops in this history. It's not like in 538, all of a sudden they're, killing all the true Christians. They have the power to do this. They start to exercise a power, at least legally. They put in place a power that they then are later going to use. And I don't know enough about this history. That is, there's so many things going on at this period of time. And often when you read the history books, they're going to be picking things. I've read some histories of this period, and then I'd read another history, and it's almost like I was reading two different histories, just because it depends on the focus of the historian, what he's really focusing upon. Some will talk a lot about, the actions of the Catholic Church. Some look at more like there's lots of different countries. Some will focus more on, what's happening in the West, some in the East. And so, to study this history, this would take a long time, to understand all of this history for each of us, studying hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, right? So we don't know much. We know what's here, though, what's here in Daniel chapter 11. And that can help us pick out these events. But corrupting by flatteries, we'd have this really general idea, flatter with prospects of position and material gain. But we don't have some specifics, like how do I mark that down as an event? So that's why I chose Charlemagne. And Charlemagne also has the advantage of having a symbolic date attached to him. So I was thinking, and I don't think this is right, but I just wanted to. So we know we got Charlemagne, and then I'm going to put here. So just sharing the screen here. Change that. So I got Count Giovanni Angelo Braschi. He's going to be born on December 25th, 1717. Anybody know who he is?
He was a pope, right?
Yeah, he's Pope Pius the Sixth.
Okay.
So and and we know that he's going to be made pope on February 15th, 1775. And then he's going to be taken captive on February 15th, 1798, which I thought was very interesting. Also, the fact that William Miller is going to be born in 1782. He's going to be born 7 years after Pope Pius becomes the Pope, right, to the day. And this period of time here is 23 years from 1775 to 1798. So he's Pope for 23 years before he's taken captive. And then we know, of course, he's going to die August 29th in 1799. So, but as far as prophetic waymarks, I think his being captured is the most relevant as far as marking the time of the end in 1798. So with this idea, what I've done is I've taken, now Charlemagne's not a pope, but he is an emperor, and we have the December 25th date. And then I said, well, that's going to be, we're going to have this at the end, right? We're going to have Pope Pius the Sixth being taken captive, and maybe this is just part of Pope Pius's own personal line. Maybe we shouldn't put these events here. But any discussion about this idea? I don't think it's the correct idea, but any discussion on this? Anybody like what's here? Anybody not like it?
It presents an interesting questions. I mean, for this to be the empowerment of the second angel's message of Pius the Sixth being installed as Pope, it's I'm trying to wrap my head around how that's working.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, but these are dates that we have. Now we have
Right.
other dates. Now the other thing is we also have Constantine the 11th. Right. He's going to be the last um, uh, emperor. So instead of dealing with these popes, I could have dealt with him. And so we did look at him a little bit near the end of the study yesterday.
But I mean, this is placing, light coming quite a bit earlier than what we have looked at historically.
I don't know what you mean.
In the past, haven't we generally looked at 1798 as having kind of the beginning of when light was coming to those after an extended period of darkness?
Yeah. But what we're looking at here is papal Rome.
Right.
So this is, we did pagan Rome, now we're doing papal Rome. And so we're looking at the start of papal Rome and the end of papal Rome. Right. So 1798 obviously is the time of the end, but here we're marking it as the third message arriving at this point. Right. So it's marking near the end of a line. And even the light that comes here is not, it's not necessarily, like, it's not the gospel message. I mean, this is addressing a particular type of darkness. And we could say it for us, it would be an understanding of history that would be being marked. So, when we look at the verses themselves, um, my inclination would be to take what's in Daniel chapter 11 and try to find the events that match that. So again, I'm going to switch back to this document. So we would just have to say what event, when it says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant, shall he corrupt by flatteries. So I'm saying, well, who's being corrupted by flatteries? It's those that turn against is it those that turn against the gospel through recantation, or maybe those that are deceived. I mean, they do wickedly against the holy covenant, or against the covenant. Here it's just using the word covenant. And particularly, what does that mean? If they're going to do wickedly against the covenant, what is it that we would mark? Now, one of the things that I look at is we have that word wickedly against, such as do wickedly against, as 7561. And so I look at that as a symbol of the Sunday law, because 7651 is the number that's 7 times. So can we, is there anything that we can take from this as far as marking this as an event? I mean, we already have, the Sunday law symbol. So we know that the Third Council of Orleans in 538, Orleans is named after Aurelian. He dedicated the Temple of Sol Invictus, December 25th, 274 AD. It's 264 years prior to 538. So Stephen gave us that information. So we can see that this typifies the Sunday law. So we look at the Third Council of Orleans. Maybe we mark that event as being what's being talked about. They that do wickedly against the covenant. Maybe it has to do with that event. So those that, because I don't know if I'm really happy with those that turn against the gospel through recantation. I don't think it's apostates necessarily, people who were Christians. So the question is, who does wickedly against the covenant? And that would have to be those that bring in the Sunday law. So we could say, if we put here Sunday law in 538. Then it says, he shall corrupt by flatteries. So can we say that when people bring in a Sunday law, now these are governments to some degree, right? I mean, it's this May 7th, 538. So I'm just going to look at this here a bit more. So the Third Council of Orleans. The Third Council of National Stature, or Third Council of Orleans, was a synod of the Catholic bishops of France. So this is a synod, Catholic bishops. It opened around the 7th of May, 538, and was presided over by Luc, Archbishop of Lyon. It established mainly Sunday as the day of the Lord, prohibition of field work on Sundays, prohibition of clerics practicing usury, prohibition of the conjuring of priests as a critic of their bishop. The bishop must redeem a Christian slave in the service of a Jew if he takes refuge in the church, while the constitutions of the lower Roman Empire demanded to return them to their master without further guarantees. Okay, so that's all we have here just in Wikipedia. So it establishes Sunday as the day of the Lord and this prohibition of field work on Sundays. Any thoughts on this? Okay, I'm just going to go over here, put this in here. So we do this before May 7th. Oops. There we go. So May 7th, obviously, it's Julian calendar, and that's going to be the 21st of Nisan on the biblical calendar. We got 16:6 here, which represents FFA. I don't know. So, maybe we just put that date there. Just going to say there's a Sunday law here in 538. So we have a Sunday law. Now, we have the popes, and we have the popes supported by the military of France. So they're supported by the state. Now, if we look at Charlemagne, then, is there any way that we can establish that as a waymark, whether it's the second angel arriving or some other way? Because the significance of Charlemagne is you have the state submitting to the church. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit here dealing with the coronation of Charlemagne. 799, after Pope Leo III was abused by Romans who tried to put out his eyes and tear out his tongue. I'm not sure why they were doing that. He escaped and fled to Charlemagne at Paderborn. Charlemagne, advised by scholar, I can never pronounce this guy's name. I know Alcuin, it's not pronounced like that, of York, traveled to Rome on November 800 and held a council on December 1st. On December 23rd, Leo swore an oath of innocence. At Mass on Christmas Day, December 25th, when Charlemagne knelt at the altar to pray, the Pope crowned him Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans, in St. Peter's Basilica. In so doing, the Pope effectively nullified the legitimacy of Empress Irene of Constantinople. So I guess in the East we have an empress. As historian James Bryce writes, when Odoacer compelled the abdication of Romulus Augustulus, he did not abolish the Western Empire as a separate power, but caused it to be reunited with or sink into the Eastern, so that from that time there was a single undivided Roman Empire. Pope Leo III and Charlemagne, like their predecessors, held the Roman Empire to be one and indivisible, and proposed by the coronation of Charlemagne not to proclaim a severance of the East and West. So Charlemagne's coronation as emperor, though intended to represent the continuation of the unbroken line of emperors from Augustus to Constantine VI, the effect of setting up two separate and often opposing empires and two separate claims to imperial authority for centuries to come, the emperors of both West and East could make competing claims of sovereignty over the whole. Okay, so that would be the issue there. Does that issue click in any way with what we're understanding about these lines? So if we look at this line is about the fall of pagan Rome, right? Now, pagan Rome, has, in a sense, been divided east and west, though for the most part, it's still one empire, even though we talk about the Eastern Roman Empire, because the capital is moved to Constantinople. The emperor in the East does not believe that he does not have control over the entire empire. I mean, he might not have practical control over what's happening necessarily, but he believes he has control, right? That is his territory. And there isn't another emperor until Charlemagne that challenges that. So that's one thought. And then we have to say, well, what does that have to do with the papacy? Or is this about the papacy per se? I mean, we know that it's the time of papal supremacy, but is it about how their supremacy rises, how it comes to be, like the beginning, and also the end of that? And so there has to be something that connects. There has to be a thread that ties these all together. So one is we have December 25th as a symbol of the Sunday law. So, we have December 25th, Clovis, we have the Sunday law, which is in that case May 7th, 538. We have Charlemagne, crowned emperor on December 25th, 800. And then we have the last pope of that 1260-year period, Pius VI, being born on December 25th, 1717. And then him becoming the Pope and his captivity both on February 15th, 23 years apart. So, any thoughts on this? I know this is tough. Anything we can say about this?
Why are we starting the darkness in 410?
Well, because we believe that the darkness has to do with the fall of pagan Rome. So that's going to be the ships of Kittim. That's why we're using 410. And the response to the ships of Kittim. So we're saying that that's the darkness. The darkness now is pagan Rome is falling. That's what we chose. So there's a darkness. So the response to that is the rise of papal Rome. And so we're using the time of the end, which is the end of pagan Rome in 476, or so the fall of Western Rome in 476, to mark the time of the end, because it's the time of the end of Western Rome. And then we're going to have 32 years before Clovis's baptism, and then another 30 years until the setting up of the abomination of desolation. So the question was, what is the darkness? Does that make any sense at all?
Well, I'm looking at this for a different reason.
Okay.
At this point, we have 410, but is that the better point to use? I mean, the only reason I'm asking is that I'm looking at a time period that comes somewhat close. In the studies that we've done on the line of Christ, we have accepted that 27 was the year in which he was baptized.
Yeah.
We've also looked that there's a different symbol that we have considered in the past in other studies of 391.
Mm-hmm.
From 27, 391 years would bring us to 418.
Okay.
Now, 418, depending on how you're counting, would generally look at being about 8 years, 7/8 years after 410. Is that possible? I mean, there's a time
From 27 and adding
391.
Okay. Okay, I see what you're doing. Okay. So you want to have 418. And what's on 418?
Well, I'm just starting to look at this. I'm looking at the numbers first and then looking for historical applications after this.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I would do that. So
Okay.
lots of reasons. So we already do have like different applications of 391, but I don't know if that makes any sense here, because we're not connecting this in that way. Like we have the 30 years, right? That 30 years this is a counterfeit line. We know that the papacy is a counterfeit and of Christ. So that's why the 30 years and then the papacy begins, right? And we mark 538 as the cross, not as the baptism, right? So there's 30 years to Christ's baptism, 3.5 years more to the cross. But here we just have the 30 years as a preparatory period. So I don't know why we would connect it to 27 BC.
I didn't say BC.
AD, I mean 27 AD. I don't see the significance of that. Like, there's no reason to connect it in that way. Like, we have symbols that are there, but I don't think a span of time. Plus, we do have an event in Daniel chapter 11. That's the ships of Kittim. We definitely can't put that in 418. Right. So we're just saying we have a waymark. It's in Daniel chapter 11, verse 30. That is where we're starting this line. We're starting it with a period of darkness. I mean, we have lots of other events. We have, the movement of the capital from Rome to Constantinople in 330. And we could say, well, we could have started there. Because, obviously this line appears to be addressing this division of the empire, especially if we start looking at Charlemagne as part of this line. But the period of darkness, it's not, I mean, we just have to have some idea of what the darkness is. This particular date's not super important here. I mean, we do have the 66 years there to the time of the end. But the idea is, what is the darkness? And the darkness has to do with the fact that pagan Rome has fallen, right? Western Rome. And now we have in its place, because the daily's been taken out of the way, that's going to happen in a period of time. And it's going to be when Clovis is baptized on December 25th in 508, that we now have the daily taken away. And so first step is, first Rome has to fall. So the fall of Western Rome, 476, is the date that we have. Clovis being baptized is the date that we have. The Sunday law, May 7th and 538, is the date that we have. And are those the first angel's message? If they are, what is that message? And we can say, well, the increase of knowledge has to do with the different battles with the Germanic, with the different kingdoms that are going on in that time. There's from the fall of Western Rome to Clovis, there is this period of time in which lots is happening, right? So those would be represented by the 10 kingdoms basically being developed. And then you have Clovis, he's the king of the Franks, and he's going to become converted. He's supporting the papacy, and then 30 years later, Justinian's is going to basically be setting up the papacy through Justinian's decree or whatever it is. Okay, so that's why we have that there. So the question is, are those three waymarks, can we say that that is a response to the darkness? Would those be the events? And I pretty much am convinced that those are the events. That is, all of them are being marked in Daniel chapter 11. And so to me, the first angel's message is pretty clear. Exactly where you want to start the darkness, I don't think it matters. We just need to know what the darkness is. And it's the events that lead to the fall of Western Rome. So when Western Rome falls, that's the time of the end, in where now we're going to see that the papacy is going to rise. Does that make sense to anybody? How I'm looking at this? Because I don't know if people are understanding what I'm doing.
Here again, I'm having to consider what you're saying because I have not thought in that type of a line.
Okay. Yeah, and all I'm doing is I'm taking what's in Daniel chapter 11 and putting it on a line, and I'm having to decide what are the events that we have in Daniel 11. How can we mark them? I think the first three are really clear. I mean, the taking up away of the daily and the setting up of the abomination of desolation, that's definitely there in the text. The ships of Kittim. So, that's what we really have here is we have the ships of Kittim, which lead to the fall of Western Rome. We have the taking away of the daily, and we have the setting up of the abomination of desolation. That is the first angel's message in this line. That's symbolized by that first message, which is arrives, is formalized, and then is empowered. And these all make sense. So I don't have problems with that first part of this line. And then we have the second angel's message. So the question is, what is that? So we have a Sunday law, and that's made by bishops. So I mean, it's more a religious law. Now they do have the power of the state, but here they're going to be controlling of the power of the state when they make when the Pope makes Charlemagne the emperor of the Western Roman Empire, believing to be, the emperor of the entire Roman Empire, but in practical terms, it's not really the case. So we know the Eastern Church still exists in Constantinople. Now, so we've talked about different things. We considered Islam, putting it in here. I don't think we are. I don't think we're going to be putting Othman in here in 1299 as a waymark. Now, we put Pope Pius VI, his birth and his becoming Pope in there. But that might be more just part of his personal life. Now, we do have Constantine the 11th, but again, he's an Eastern Roman emperor. And now, Eastern Rome falling, is that important in this context? I mean, we generally don't study much about the Eastern Roman Empire. So the Byzantine Empire. So it's a continuation of the Roman Empire centered in Constantinople during late antiquity and the Middle Ages. So the eastern half of the empire survived the conditions that caused the fall of the West in the 5th century and continued to exist until the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire in 1453. So we know Constantine the 11th is going to be the last emperor, right? In 1449, he becomes the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And 4 years later, Constantinople was going to fall. Okay. During most of its existence, the empire remained the most powerful economic, cultural, and military force in the Mediterranean world. The term Byzantine Empire was only coined following the empire's demise. Its citizens referred to the polity as the Roman Empire and to themselves as Romans. Due to the imperial seat's move from Rome to Byzantium, the adoption of state Christianity, and the predominance of Greek instead of Latin, modern historians continue to make a distinction between the earlier Roman Empire and the later Byzantine Empire. During the earlier Pax Romana period, that's the Roman peace, the western parts of the empire became increasingly Latinized, while the eastern parts largely retained their pre-existing Hellenistic culture. This created a dichotomy between the Greek East and Latin West. These cultural spheres continued to diverge after Constantine I moved the capital to Constantinople and legalized Christianity. Under Theodosius, Christianity became the state religion, and other religious practices were proscribed. Greek gradually replaced Latin for official use as Latin fell into disuse. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of history, and some of this I know a little bit. The empire was dissolved in 1204 following the sack of Constantinople by Latin armies at the end of the Fourth Crusade. Its former territories were then divided into competing Greek and Latin realms. Despite the eventual recovery of Constantinople in 1261, and I usually have 1260, but anyway, the reconstituted empire would wield only regional power during its final 2 centuries of existence. Its remaining territories were progressively annexed by the Ottomans in perennial wars fought through the 14th and 15th centuries. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453 ultimately brought the empire to an end. Many refugees who had fled the city after its capture settled in Italy and throughout Europe, helping to ignite the Renaissance. Okay. So, yeah. So Constantine the 11th being the last one. I don't know. Do we address the Eastern Roman Empire? I mean, Charlemagne's rise, he would be challenging the authority of the empress at that time in the East. Anybody with any ideas on this? What we could do? Now, there's the interesting thing there is we do see that actually Constantinople falls to the Western Roman Empire briefly. Right, the Catholic Church is actually going to conquer Constantinople, which so they call that the sack of Constantinople. And then my understanding is it's going to be in 620. They say here 621, but or not 621, 1261, and I say it's 1260 that they end up I did some research in this back 2018, 2019. Yeah, the siege of Constantinople in 1260. Okay, that's what happened. So they failed to take over. So it's a failed siege. What was it about that siege? Yeah, so in 1261, they're going to eventually take it over, but there's this siege in 1260, and I did some research on it before. But that was a long time ago. Okay. Anyway, there was some significance regarding that siege that I don't remember. I think it had something to do with the biblical dates or the dates in that siege. Hmm. So it's going to be the Nicene army that tries to capture Constantinople from the Latins, from the Latin Empire. Okay, so I guess that's strange. Yeah. See, I don't know enough about this history. Yeah, in 1261. Yeah, so the Paleologos dynasty, that's of course Constantine the 11th, is Dracosis Paleologos, right? So that's his family name or part of his dynasty, right? So it's not going to be until 1453 that it's actually going to fall to the Ottoman Turks, to the Ottoman Empire. Okay. So there's a lot of history in there that we're not particularly familiar with, you know, as Westerners. Right? We don't really study the Eastern Roman Empire because we're more affected by the Western Roman Empire. So the question is there anything in Daniel chapter 11 that can address that? So I'm using Daniel chapter 11 as where we're getting our information. So we know the people that do know their God shall be strong and do. Right. So we know that there's a preaching of the gospel there. I mean, I don't know how we mark that as a waymark. We know they that understand among the people shall instruct many, that they shall fall by the sword. So obviously we know that's the persecution that's going to occur. And by flame, by captivity, and by spoil. So there's four. Four of them is sword, flame, captivity, spoil. And then we have the many days. So the many days we just attach to the 1260 years. And then they shall fall, but they shall be holpen or helped with a little help. Now, should we put in there something to do with the United States being the land of the free? You know, we could, you know, the question is what leads to the fall of papal Rome? I mean, maybe it has something to do with what happens in the United States. I mean, we know obviously France is going to take him captive. How do we connect that history at all? Do we connect it at all? Any thoughts? You guys got to help me a bit here because I mean, do we put the Mayflower in here?
Under what application would we put the Mayflower in here?
That is the earth helps the woman.
But does that equate to something having to do with the first angel or second angel?
Well, that's the second angel. That would be, so that's what we would have to decide, whether we have Charlemagne and all this stuff in there, or whether we look at, because what it says is there's going to be this persecution for 1260 years, but the earth is going to help the woman. So do we focus upon that as waymarks, as the second angel? Now we do have a date there, which we should know, November 9th, 1620. They're going to cite land, Cape Cod, right? Do we put that as the arrival of the second angel? Do we take things from American history as addressing this help? Right? So we're looking at what's here. This is what's given us. So the earth helps the woman, right? So that is from Revelation chapter 12. And we're making that parallel here. During this period of 1260 years, now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help. And then it says, but many shall cleave to them with flattery. So again, we have flatteries being mentioned. Some of them of understanding shall fall. To try them, purge them, make them white. So that brings us to 1798. Okay. So if we just forget about Charlemagne here, I'm gonna do this. I'm just gonna duplicate the slide. Okay. So we could look at the Mayflower, and the date we have, November 9th, 1620. Now the nice thing about that date is it has the same digits as the 1260 in it. And then it also has November 9th. So if this is the second angel, how does this lead then to the fall of the papacy? Would we mark events in American history?
Okay. Here again, a different application of numbers.
Okay.
It's interesting because you, in noting this from history, November 9th of 1620 is the arrival, right?
Yeah, that's when they see Cape Cod.
Okay. But April 5th of the following year, fifth
16.
day of the fourth month, is when the Mayflower returns to England.
Okay.
But then if you're also looking at this from 1620 to 1798, you
Yeah.
have 178 years, the digits of 187
Yeah.
coming to the time when the Pope is taken captive.
Yeah. And so what you have there that's interesting. So um now, so you're saying we have April 5th,
Yes,
1621. Now it's so what happens on that date?
the Mayflower sets sail for a return trip to England.
Okay, so it begins to set sail.
Right.
Okay. So, if you looked at Millerite history, we know that the second angel arrives the first day of the first month, which we have as a symbol as being connected to 9/11 and 11/9, right?
All right.
Okay. Second angel arrives at 9/11. Also, we can attach November 9th to that symbol of 9/11, and that's the second angel arriving. The second angel's formalized on the fifth day of the fourth month at Boston, right?
Right.
So here we have this here. Now, if we're going to say that this is the Mayflower, this is again the Mayflower, but it's just leaving. So this is all about the earth helping the woman. What would we put at the second angel empowered then? So we're just saying this is all about the earth helping the woman. Do we put like 1776 in there?
I don't know yet. I'm looking at something else with this.
Okay. I mean, because if we put in, July 4th, 1776, you got the United States, the Declaration of Independence, and then you got 22 years to the Pope being captive.
Repeat why you got April 5th, 1621.
Well, that's when the Mayflower leaves. That's when it goes back to England.
Okay.
Now, I don't know the whole story of all that, so I assume they're going back. For what reason? Why are they going back?
I
mean,
would, I would believe for other provisions
Yeah,
or
so
to bring other settlers.
yeah, I think would bring other people there. So, I mean, the earth helping the woman, we always mark the pilgrims who came on the Mayflower.
Wouldn't it also be that they might be taking stuff back? Like like they could have gotten like gold or something like that while it was there, some kind of treasure that they might have found while they was there and taking it back too.
Well, while that's possible, I mean, a lot of the reason for the Mayflower coming was for religious freedom.
Right, I understand that. I just thought maybe there was, you know, that they could be just taking stuff back to show them that their trip was uh was not made um void or something other that they could do commerce as well. I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think so. But um, now there's a question about 1773. So 25 years of the shortening of the 1260. I'm not sure about the question. That we should mark 1773 as some event in 1773 rather than 1776? Is that what you're asking, Daniel? Okay, so that's what he's asking. Now, we got like the Boston Tea Party in 1773, but um, I don't know if that's. I mean, we do have it in other lines. We have 1773 marked. Now, the thing is with the Mayflower, like we have April 5th there. I mean, there might be a line just where that symbol becomes relevant, right? But I don't know if the sending of the Mayflower back is a formalization of the message. I have to think about that. So this is all about the earth helping the woman. Now, we know that it's going to be France that takes the Pope captive. It's not the United States. But the United States rises at that time in 1798. So, I mean, Americans, of course, mark, 1776. But there's a period of time from the American Revolution in which they actually become recognized as a separate country. And my understanding is that's when they that's what Ellen White marks. But there's stuff dealing with their fleet and different things like that, wars that they get involved in. There's a lot of history in there. So I don't know if I'm completely satisfied with this. But I think it's a little bit better as far as sticking to the text.
Well, here's another thing that's kind of intriguing. Now, the date of November 9th, that's a Julian date, correct?
Yeah, it's a Julian date.
The
And the
time,
reason Julian is because the Brits and the Americans have not changed from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar at that point, even though much of Europe has.
okay. But what I was looking at in this situation, between November 9th and April 5th,
Mm-hmm.
you have a span of 147 days.
Okay.
147 years was the number of years of Jacob's life.
Yeah. 3 times 49.
Or 7 times 21.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, this brings us up to, so we have the earth helping the woman. Right, just because we're saying that they're hoping with a little help, and that is referring to the new world, right? The earth
Okay,
help woman. So that's why we have that, and that's going to be, um, and then it says, "They that understand among the people uh, shall instruct many, that they shall fall by the sword." Okay,
Did it take the Mayflower to go back, what, 30 days?
that's correct. They arrived in less than half the time in England from of the time that it took them to sail to America.
yeah, that's just because of the prevailing winds. Um, okay, so he says, "Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help." And this is, they're going to have these four things that are marked uh, during the period of the 1260, right? As we noted, the sword, the flame, the captivity, and the spoil. Many days, so 1260 years. So we're saying that is this period of persecution that happens during the 1260. There's four different things that are marked, and it says, "Now when they shall fall." So once their persecution, they're in that period of the persecution, they shall be holpen with a little help. So that's the earth helping the woman, Revelation 12:16. "But many shall cleave to them with flatteries." So that we haven't particularly addressed. And then, "and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, to purge them, and make them white." So that's the time of the end with the three angels' messages, 1798 to 1844. Right. So even at the time of the end, because it is yet for an appointed time. So that's October 22nd, 1844. So to me, we would have to then address, "but many shall cleave to them with flattery." So we can just put, "The earth helps the woman." I mean, I don't have problems with that being the Mayflower. Um, I'm not sure if I'd put the April 5th date in here. I think it's an interesting date. And definitely it would be in some line, but not necessarily in this line. Because I don't particularly see how that would be a formalization. So we'd have to figure out what the "many shall cleave to them with flatteries" is about. Like, how would we look at that as a waymark? And so we got the many, the they, and so how's it go again? So they're going to be helped with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. So we have some many are going to cleave, and that cleave 3867. That is to twine. Let's get this set up right. So this lava, to be joined, to join oneself, to borrow, to cause to borrow, to lend. It also means to borrow. So it must have to do with some kind of an agreement. Let me look at this word. I can think of some places where cleave occurs in the Bible. Genesis 29:34. She conceived again and bare a son and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me. That word joined is cleaved. So you can see it's Levites are joined. Oh, not Sharon. I didn't hit the button. Why is it not working? Okay, I hit the button, but it didn't work. There we go. Okay, so 3868. This is stupid. I don't see anything. There we go. So 3867 to twine. That's Strong's. Well, and then we have, so the only time it's translated as cleave is in Daniel 11:34. It's often translated as borrow and lend. Okay. So would there be some kind of joining that we can mark? They shall cleave to them with flatteries, that we can mark that as an event. And this flatteries, 2519. It's just one short of 2520. Kalaka. It's quite a word. Kind of interesting. It's actually just a reduplication of another word. In Strong's 2505 is the same word. So he has that number twice in the same word, just because of its form, kalak. Kalak. And that word, to divide, is kind of weird. So that means something different. in 1121. So this word here for flatteries is different than the other word for flatteries. So we have 2514. Yeah, just a different form of the same word. Okay, so many's going to cleave to them. Now, why to them? Why not to him? In verse 34, why is it cleaving to them with flatteries? It's a feminine plural noun. So the feminine is just the ending of the chot. Bachala kelachot. Kelachot. It's quite the word. Lach. Kelachot.
You're right. That is interesting that two different words are being translated as flatteries, especially when the second one that you're looking at right now is translated in the earlier portions of scripture as slippery.
Right. Which is the basic word of what flattery is there. It's a type of slipperiness. Sort of like a smooth tongue or a slippery tongue, right?
Well, I mean, again, in Daniel, it occurred earlier in 1121.
Mm-hmm.
And being tied to the vile person.
Yep. That's how he, which we looked at before, being Tiberius and Trump. But the idea, of cleaving or joining with something that's slippery too is kind of an interesting idea. They shall cleave to them with slipperiness. So it would show that, there's going to be some that are going to be persecuted. They're going to be helped because the earth is going to help the woman. But many, so it doesn't tell us who particularly these are. I would assume that they're people who, could either flee to the promised land, could, the United States, could go into the wilderness, but they're going to be deceived in some way by the papacy. But it says cleave to them with flatteries. Now, so the fact that it says them, though, is the thing that kind of bothers me, because this, I think, would actually mean the them that they're going to cleave to would have to be the ones that are actually being persecuted, or at least that the earth is helping. So could this have something to do with, there's people that go to the US, right? Some to avoid persecution, right? To flee the ire of the dragon. But the people that are there are going to, provide a temptation for them, right? So we have the rise of the United States. And in the rise of the United States, you're going to have this constitutions, all these different things. And then we have Protestant America. So when we get to verse 35, and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, to purge, to make them white. We know that that's going to be the testing time of the Millerite period. So I think there must be something in there about the rise of Protestantism, and that this help, I think it can be connected to the Constitution. But there's also this worldliness that's there as well. And that's what's hindering the church. That's why the church needs to go through the first, second, and third angels' messages. Anyway, we're going to stop there. I know this is a painful study, but I do think we're getting somewhere. Okay, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this day. We ask for a blessing upon the rest of the day, and that we can come together tomorrow to tie up some of these ideas, and that we can see clearly what it is we're looking at. And I pray for each person. May your angels watch over them. May you protect our families, and may we represent you. Thank you again. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.